Hello everyone tuning into today's online session. My name is not EBG Network, my name is Anna Bjerkerud, but I do run EBG Network, the host of today's online session. With web cameras on, mayhem may happen, but we are for sure looking forward to the next hour together with you who have tuned in. EBG Network is a company and a website that gather and share cross-function and cross-organization business development insights, focusing on sourcing, procurement, and finance. And we do webinars like today, we do 2 summits a year, and we do different online benchmark sessions as well. Today, we actually have a smorgasbord of views and insights on the matters at hand for procurement and supply chain professionals and companies. A smorgasbord very fitting for those of you who are logging on from Sweden. You know, we have the midsummer evening coming up on Friday. Today, very rainy, so that's always very nervous for us in Sweden, not knowing what the weather is going to be like. It's all we talk about these days, actually, apart from certain other aspects that we know too well about. I'm not the one who's going to be sharing insights with you today. I'm going to try and keep these 3 gentlemen together and try to squeeze out as much knowledge as we possibly can from them. We do hope that you who have tuned in want to send in questions. I mean, do take the opportunity to send them in and we'll answer them to the best of our knowledge at the very end of this session. And as you can see, we do have the web cameras on. Not sure how many of you are sitting at home still working with various internet connections. If you noticed any lagging, you can always choose to turn them off and listen to our hopefully beautiful and insightful voices. I too will be on web camera and at the same time try to look at your questions and manage the technology, so do bear with me. But enough of that, let's kick this off. I actually typed down a kind of summary of what we will be covering today. And I wrote down visibility, challenges and possibilities, available sources of information, supplier relationship development, partnership focus, risk exposure, and how to view commercial agreements now and ahead. And I do think that that quite summarized this smorgasbord of insights that we're going to go through today. The 3 gentlemen you have in front of you are here to share everything they know with you. And with that, I hand over audio and video to you, Richard.
Well, thank you very much, Anna. Look, delighted to meet you all, albeit on the end of technology. Richard Beaumont, I work as an independent consultant in the procurement space, looking after both large companies and SMEs, but also particularly trying to drive the agenda of training and how we can contribute greater value rather than just doing things that, frankly, technology can do at the bottom end of the procurement process. But looking forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Well, then, good afternoon. My name is Martin Mohr. Good afternoon from Frankfurt in Germany. My role in this webinar is to provide the technology side. I'm running business development and alliances across Europe for the company iCertis. I've been in procurement and technology for the last 25 years. I worked at IBM as a procurement solution expert, as well as a buyer at Bayer AG. So that's about me. Over to you, Hayden.
Hayden Jones. I am a consultant at PwC, so I lead the blockchain team in the United Kingdom from a sales business development perspective. I'm an engineer and qualified lawyer, and I spent the best part of 7 years in investment banks, 5 years as a consultant at A.T. Kearney, 5 years at the Bank of England as a technology lead over there, and then 4 years in Fujitsu. And then I've always been very interested in the way that we see failure in transactions, so failure in banking transactions, but also failure in procurement. Always been very interested in procure to pay. And for me, the opportunity to take a technology such as blockchain and actually apply it to address some of the challenges that we currently face has been very, very interesting. So absolutely delighted to join. I think it's set up to be a really interesting conversation in terms of the challenges that we face and the different options that we've got from a technical perspective.
Well, I guess if we're going to have a good discussion now, we ought to sort of set the scene. It's pretty hard to imagine that any of us in our companies have got something in our risk register which listed everything that's going on at the moment, all happening at once, and trying to deal with it while you're locked into your house. I mean, if we think about it, companies large and small are wrestling with the same problem. Commercial relationships are stuck. There is a problem in the flow of cash, in currency, in capital. There is a lack of visibility of what is going on in different countries. There is completely disruptive restrictions at borders in terms of what can move and how it can move. And stuck in the middle of all of that are commercial, legal, procurement, supply chain teams trying to get visibility of what's happening and struggling in the face of everybody else trying to do it at the same time. And, in all of our countries, wherever we are, there's some great examples. If we look at medical equipment that has been in demand by everybody at the same time, pretty much all from the same suppliers. And now we're trying to work out whether or not we can get it. And frantically, we're looking around for our contracts and our commercial agreements to work out who's got to do what to try and unpick it. And I don't think it's an understatement to say that on a scale of big, real, hairy challenges, this is right up there. So I don't know. It's Hayden, you must be seeing a great deal in supply chains going on. I mean, what are you witnessing as the things that are really hurting companies at the moment?
I think that the disruption that we've had in terms of the people haven't been able to get into the office, so that creates problems as it relates to administrative things like paying invoices. So that means we have a cash squeeze as it then flows down the supply chain. We've also got the challenge that obviously orders aren't being processed. So again, that creates a cash squeeze in terms of actually passing demand again through the supply chain. And then we've got all of these sort of wild oscillations as it relates to left field demands for things that we didn't necessarily think we needed so much of 6 months ago. And a great use case, great example there is things like polycarbonate. So we see now big shortages of polycarbonate. And what do we need polycarbonate for? Well, we need polycarbonate for creating these screens that we put in a retail type environment to protect obviously staff that are working behind the counter. And then so we've got these sort of wild oscillations in the supply chain in terms of demand. We've got challenges in terms of people getting paid on time. We've got challenges as it relates to orders actually being processed on time. And this makes for a very potent and difficult community of stakeholders to actually bring together. And I ask myself, having spent the last 6 years working in the blockchain space, I ask myself, is this a blockchain solution? Can blockchain go to solve these problems? And I think the immediate answer to that is no. Okay, blockchain, whilst at the headline, it's all about trust. It's about bringing people together that don't necessarily need to know each other, but need to be trusted. And where we've got situations that we don't have a central trust broker, but there isn't the time to implement those kind of solutions. What we need is something that's far more tactical, something that's far more sort of community oriented in terms of actually gathering up, what do you need at the moment? Well, actually, I need visibility. I need to be able to make sure that people got paid on time. And I need to be able to process orders. And what are those critical components that actually flow through the supply chain that we've got to make sure get delivered to people on time?
So what are your thoughts, Martin and Richard, about, we're going to go deeper into technology, but of course blockchain visibility, one could imagine a bit of rising dawn there. What are your thoughts, Martin?
No, I agree. Certainly not the time to rush into implementing new technology. Nevertheless, blockchain is certainly part of a solution. Because in order to get, as Hayden mentioned, the trusted data, you need to have some kind of connection throughout the whole supply chain. And the technology, the third generation distribution ledger technology is ready. Our point of view is, of course, you need to have also, first of all, internally data sets which you can trust on. So you need to clean up in your own house before you actually can connect within your supply chain, and then have immutable data within a consortium, where actually all supply chain members can also share their data and therefore make it available to do business decisions. So our point of view is that, yes, technology is ready, but let's do first things first, and first get full visibility of your customer relations, how it is defined in your contracts. And then secondly, of course, implement blockchain technology to enable collaboration with your supply chains. I mean, there are real examples, meanwhile, some of them are known. Daimler, for instance, is monitoring the whole sustainability within the whole supply chain to make sure that in all contracts alongside the supply chain, sustainability clauses are agreed. So this is possible nowadays to get certain data immutable through the supply chain. Richard, I don't know, what is your take on that?
Well, look, I agree fully. I think technology can play an incredible part in sorting this out. But I think you made an excellent point as well, which is that if you didn't have the technology in place, trying to do it in the middle of an issue, it's a bit like, trying to fit a fire extinguisher into your house as the flames are licking up the walls. It's the right idea, but the timing's wrong. And, there's a great example. It's just look at all the new bits of technology companies are having to wrestle with at the moment just to be able to communicate. I think, the time at the moment with the issues that we have, it sounds really basic, but it's dialogue. It's talking to people. It's having a conversation to understand what is going on both upstream and downstream, so that you can understand the pressures and the issues and try to identify a way forward. I mean, the way I guess I kind of describe it as a technology enhanced dialogue. It's using what you've got to give you information, or even doing what we're doing now, using Zoom to have a conversation with your supplier where you can see each other and identify with each other is a better version of just having a phone call. And it's certainly a lot better than having an email, which is just the worst thing to do. So I think my advice to anyone facing this issue right now is get on the phone or get on the video call, talk to people, hear where they are, try to reach a compromise. And I suppose I hope we're going to come back to this later when we sort of talk a bit more about, the impact on commercial agreements, is think about what you're doing now in the context of what you will do better in the future. God forbid, we ever have a repeat. But, Hayden, I'm intrigued. I follow the developments in blockchain, and it just strikes me that, had this happened just a bit later, we might have had some useful things in our armory. I mean, what could it have done for us?
I'm not going to, there's one point you made there, and I'm not going to steal your thunder because I know that you're going to come to that. But I think just to respond to one point you made, I used to run a procurement function, and I've bid out services on behalf of people like the NHS and actually, the Bank of England as well, actually. And I've also bought as well, and I've also sold services into a public sector context. I always used to say, actually, all these procurement frameworks are great. I love them. It's great discipline. But actually, the real test is, could I get on a plane with these people, fly for 24 hours, land at some challenged part of the world, get off at the other end, and do a full day's work with them and still be friends, okay? And you should be building up relationships with your supplier community. And there's that, I think it's the Kraljic matrix, and what it allows you to do is segment. I always forget the fourth one, because you've got you've got tactical, strategic, leverage, and there's one other which I exploit. And you've got, and this comes back to that, it's the sort of the hygiene within the procurement function to understand, well, where are my strategic suppliers? Where are my tactical suppliers? Where are the exploit? Where are the leverage ones? And what you've got to be very sensitive to is that, because you can have a tactical one, like sandwiches, for example, and this is what happened to British Airways several years ago, because their sandwich provider went on strike.
Right.
And lo and behold, what happened was this lovely little sandwich provider all of a sudden became a strategic supplier, because actually the planes couldn't take off because you can't feed your passengers. So you've got to have a good feel for, how the dynamics of your supply chain. Now, as to whether blockchain, I think we probably missed this by about, we're about 12 months behind the curve.
Right.
The lots of interest, things like provenance of goods, trade finance is very interesting. So you can do trade finance on a blockchain, so you can pass cash down the supply chain quite effectively. So we're seeing lots of interesting inbound queries now as it relates to these. We're about 12 months behind, I think. But my hope, my expectation is that we'll be able to build supply chains with greater resilience, so they can be reconfigured digitally, okay, and greater sort of responsiveness, but also greater transparency, so that we can trace these goods all the way back to where they came from. And then, if we're concerned that that particular jurisdictions offer some kind of threat, we can be constantly profiling that threat. And then what we can do is we can reconfigure the supply chain so that we're actually spreading that risk, we're diversifying that risk. It's a bit like running an investment portfolio in many ways, because I want a diversified group of suppliers across multiple jurisdictions that allow me to respond to shocks in the supply chain.
There we go.
But let me just ask, because it is quite daunting what it is you're saying, and we do know that companies do struggle with getting beyond even their tier one suppliers on any day, on any month of any year. What is it that you're actually saying that companies should do to increase that visibility? And I would assume that it does go longer than those possibly few tier one suppliers. What's your thoughts on that, Richard?
Okay, great question. I don't know if you remember, a few years ago, there was a big problem in the automotive industry. I think there was a fire at a small factory. I'm guessing, I think it was Germany, northern Germany. But that factory was responsible for making a chemical that contributed to the pigment black in paint, including specialist automotive paint. And I think the interesting was, nobody knew that for all of their sourcing of their paint and their equipment to paint and spray vehicles, the robots that do it, that actually nearly every single automotive manufacturer was dependent on a single factory producing a chemical. And in the automotive world, this was a huge calamity. And there was lots of talk at the time about, this is why we need to not only speak to our tier ones, but we need to speak to our tier twos, their tier ones, and so on, so that we get visibility. And if we're being completely honest, some companies do it, most don't. And there's a good reason for that, which is it's really, really hard. You speak to your tier ones because you've got a contractual relationship with them, but it's a bit like when you're kids and you have a girlfriend and you see their friend and you think they're quite nice and you say to your girlfriend, please introduce me to your friend. Funnily enough, they don't want to. And it's the same with tier ones. You speak to them and you say, tell me who your suppliers are. And of course, the tier one turns around and says, well, why do you want to speak to my tier twos? Are you just going to try and cut me out here and go or find out my pricing or find out my margins? Why do you want that relationship? So it's always been a fraught thing to do. Then something like this happens, and it's not just, the pigment for paint for one sector. We're talking fundamentally about raw materials, chemicals, part finished goods, technology providers, service industries. How many companies have got their activities outsourced to India, for example, where they are literally living business continuity plans of trying to pick up entire call centers and operate them from home to deliver services that we've taken for granted for years. So suddenly, not only does that visibility of where do our supply chains snake back to in terms of, you know, the tier 5, 6, 7 that they're all dependent on, but what countries are they in? Are they affected or not affected by different restrictions that are being put in place by governments to limit the spread of the virus? So you're actually fighting on two fronts. You're fighting to get control of what you're trying to deliver upstream to your customers, and you're also fighting downstream to go and find out what's been going on with your suppliers. And the trouble is, you're not going to fix that in the middle of a crisis. It's simply not possible to. Every company will have put a crisis management team of some description into the things that are most critical to try to ensure continuity, but you can't do that for everything. And, you know, I'm sure, you know, every company has had to take some pretty hard decisions about what they focus on, about whether they satisfy some customers but don't satisfy others. And that's a tough thing to do. And, you know, part of being able to make those decisions is being able to know what your obligations are. And, you know, we come full circle back to the nature of the commercial agreements you have in place, both with your suppliers, but also with your customers, so that when suddenly something's gone wrong, not only do you know, because you can look at those agreements and understand where you are, but you can also begin to have that dialogue we talked about earlier that will enable you know, you to resolve it in a way that minimizes the impact, because we're not going to get rid of the impact. It's already happening. I mean, Martin, you know, thinking about this again, we've bounced right the way back to sort of commercial agreements again and knowing what you're going on. I mean, how would you advise companies with this, right?
Exactly, Richard. No, you made, among many other interesting statements too, I want to point out. You said early on, you know, when the house is on fire, you want to make sure that you have actually the insurance policy in front of you, and understand what I need to do now. You know, what are my obligations and what are my entitlements, what I'm getting, and that's pretty much actually happening in such a crisis, like a pandemic, of course, that you want to understand how am I secured from a contractual point of view, how am I impacted commercially, how are my suppliers, of course, impacted, not the tier 1, also tier 2, tier 3. And it starts, and we also mentioned that before, is having a conversation is absolutely key from a personal standpoint, to have the tier 1 also be with you going through that crisis, and also your customers. On the other hand, of course, you need to quickly look into your relationships and your business relationships from a contractual perspective. And this is actually where we see right now a great demand, not just about technology, that you can do that from home and that you can continue communicating like we do right now, but also getting access to important contractual data. And coming to those data sets, in the past, as we all know, those contract data had been stored somewhere in a file storage, ideally maybe OCR capable, so you can at least do full text search. But in many cases, you're not fully aware of what risk are we carrying as a company right now, based on what we agreed with our suppliers as well as our customers, of course. Yeah. So first of all, you need those data sets to do strategic decisions, and you need them on the tip of your fingers. And technologies nowadays can help you, of course. I mean, the AI technology involved, we're using a lot of cognitive services from Microsoft within our products, that you can quickly digitize the contracts. You can actually discover those contracts. You can identify the relations between those contracts, the SLAs which you might need to meet. You need to find the force majeure clause. How is it really, what is supposed to happen now in such a situation? So technology can help you to have also meaningful discussion with your suppliers and with your customers, in order to come to as I think, Hayden, you said, so are you going to step on an airplane with somebody flying around the world and then still work together. I think this is something you need to agree on also with your suppliers right now. We are on a journey, and we hopefully come out of this stronger than before. In order to do that, we need full visibility of all the contractual things which are affected by that.
Yeah. And I would imagine that there are, different aspects of those liaisons with more or less important suppliers, not necessarily stepping on them and squeezing them for, lowered costs or whatever, but I guess also understanding what is the risk exposure here and now and ahead. We've done sessions before, and maintaining supply continuity is just, it has been such a challenge. And then of course you have a lot of information that people need to have access to, and people are working from home or were working from home. We talk a lot about risks these days. What are your views on that? If we start with you, Martin, picking up from where you left off, what is risk assessment and risk management from your perspective?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, let's dig deeper into the risk point of view. Of course, you have a risk within either your suppliers are not able to deliver what they were supposed to deliver, or you, as a consequence, are not able upstream to deliver your customers. And right now, I also help them with business continuity. Before I approach that technically, I want to give you a point of view which our company took early on. We defined when in March, when it turned out that we all will be in lockdown situations and there are uncertainties in the economy. We in the leadership team early on said we need to define a clear guideline and communicate early on. And we defined 4 rings of responsibility. So the first ring is yourself. Like on an airplane, when there are turbulences or there's actually a dangerous situation, you need to cover your own mouth with a mask to breathe before you can help somebody else. So we said the first ring of responsibility needs to be taking care of yourself. Secondly, of course, family, because if your family is not safe, they are not at your house, in your home, you can look after them, then of course you feel also very uncertain. Thirdly, the community. The community means actually you might have helped your elder neighbors to do the grocery shopping. And then the 4th ring, which we communicated to our teams, is of course business. And we early on wanted to make sure that we are safe, family is safe, community, somebody's taken care of. Business. Business is key. And then you have a full focus on the customer because you feel, as far as possible, comfortable with the situation. That means regarding the business, we early on decided that we want to be part of that business continuity. And what we basically did is that very easy things, of course. Our customers could not provide the same level of support running their technology. So we extended basically the support to 24/7 free of charge to help our customers picking up user calls. We also actually moved the whole operations cloud on Microsoft Azure to make sure that everybody in our company can work from home serving customers, but also customers have access to the technology. And then lastly, most important, staying virtually connected to what Richard just said. We reached out to our customers. In fact, our CEO called all the customers. And statements were, if all the suppliers would actually take so much care right now that business continuity takes place, then we wouldn't have, it's less thing to worry about. So it was also considered as, if we get through that, we will be stronger after then we entered into that crisis. So these are the risks which we are addressing as business continuity based on the contracts you agreed with your suppliers, but go beyond what is contractually agreed.
Richard?
Do you know what? I'm reflecting. I'm reflecting because, whenever I think about risk, right, and I've lost count of how many people I've trained on in the procurement space about risk registers and how to do it, right? And whenever you talk about the subject, everyone's thinking comes to some dreadful Excel document that gets dragged out once a year for a review, And whenever you're training anyone, you're trying to explain the difference between likelihood and impact. And if I'm training, I normally have this silly example of, well, think about a meteor hitting your factory. Okay, the likelihood is incredibly low, but the impact is going to be pretty significant if it does hit. And everyone has a little giggle, and we ignore it. We've just had a meteor. We've just had a meteor of a global pandemic. The likelihood is tiny. I mean, what is the likelihood of every single country on the planet simultaneously experiencing disruption in supply, in demand, and in everything else? And the impact is huge. So we have three choices, right? We can dig out that half-inch thick Excel document and start hitting people with it. Never going to work. We could start doing an inquiry to find out why we didn't write down pandemic and do all the things that we needed to do 2 years ago. Too late. So the thing that we're left with is the practical things of back to dialogue. How do I manage the risks, which are no longer risks, they've happened? And there's a great question set with suppliers, which is, what are you worried about? What are you worried about today? Because maybe I can help you with that. That's the kind of conversation we need to be having with our suppliers. And we would hope that our customers would be having the same conversations with us. But the thing that we just need to start thinking about, particularly for suppliers, is the what if questions. What if this continues for a period of time? What if the suppliers and the way of working that we have gotten used to don't recover or change their priorities as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic? What would I do differently? What do I need to change? Do I need, if I've been putting everything offshore, do I need to start thinking about onshoring? But it's that deal with the thing today by talking and offering help and understanding, being empathic that it's not the supplier's fault they're suffering from the same thing that you're suffering from. But be practical in terms of, what am I going to do differently next month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months? And, I guess, Hayden, in your world, that kind of relationships thing has got to be popping up for you as well.
Well, just to pick up on the risk point. So my first job was at Swiss Bank Corporation. We learned about derivatives, and our definition of risk was exposure to change. And that definition has lived with me throughout my career. And that's both through all the different investment banks, but also the Bank of England. And, the bank are the preeminent risk managers, if you like, of the economy. That's what central bankers do. So that sort of exposure to change headline, I think, is incredibly useful. And it just kind of runs through, no matter what function, whatever sector, it's always there. You can't substitute practical dialogue with sort of theoretical stuff, because you've got to know these people. You've got to sort of look them in the cold of their eyes and say, look, are they worried? Okay, and I used to, I've referred to things like a pulse check. Call them up. How are they feeling? What's going on? So you can't beat that kind of dialogue with spreadsheets and all that kind of stuff. It's useful, but actually you need to be on the phone with these people and actually talk to them. Now, but let's play this forward a bit. Let's play this forward, because we're all, iCert is a great technology company, contract management tool. We're all ambitious in terms of using this wonderful technology. I mean, for me, it's, I sort of think of the supply chain a bit like a suspension bridge, okay? And, every single, rod in that suspension bridge, they form a really important part, you see. Now, if you're in charge of managing maintenance of that suspension bridge, you get a couple of guys out, they walk the bridge once a year, they've got the hammers and they're looking at the cable ties and everything. And they come back and they tell you, well, we need to paint those ones, we need to repaint those ones. And then, the bridge is designed so that actually if a couple of cable ties get broken, one's corroded, there's a crash, the bridge will still stay up, okay? But it gets a point where critical mass has been lost, the bridge collapses. A supply chain is like a suspension bridge. The only difference is you've got to manage it real time. So actually what you need are sensors on each of those cable ties telling you what the state of that, what tension is like, and what's the state, how robust it is to support the bridge. And you see it's playing through into what iCertis have got. iCertis can act as your reciprocal to capture all of that data. And then if you can add in clever things, and I think I said as we've got an AI overlay anyway, but what you do is you start mining that data, and what you're looking for are the interrelationships between different stress profiles that start to point to early warning. So it's very much in what they do in aeronautical engineering. They look at stress fractures in aircraft, early warnings for that. And we've got to take some of these ideas, and it's exactly the same problem, because what we're looking for is stress, early signs of stress in the supply chain. And it's not just 1, 2, 3, it's all the way back through to where the cobalt comes out of the ground, the mica is mined. It's at that point there. We had, I think you talked about supply chain disruption. I think last year we had a great issue with tonic water. I think it was tonic water, because we had issues with CO2, carbon dioxide supply.
Oh yeah, yes, last year or 2 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, these sort of outlier supplier disruptions always fascinate me, and it's telling me that our supply chain risk management not operating like in the same way that we manage a suspension bridge. And then we can do other clever things with blockchain. But blockchain's a tomorrow opportunity. I'm more interested in how we solve some of the today challenges.
Yeah, but after all, lots and lots of companies do want to have more contracts in place, want to tie up the upstream with the downstream, making sure that companies actually buy what they have been sourcing for whatever reason they have been sourcing it, and paying the amount of money they have agreed to pay. So there has been a lot of focus on those contracts. You actually talk more about commercial agreements, Martin, right, at I-30s. And I know that you have a view related, obviously, to the risk exposure as well, Richard, about those agreements and how to consider them from a slightly different perspective.
Yeah, I mean, look, if finding the risk register is tricky, for those who are familiar with the Where's Wally book of trying to find the bespectacled red and white striped man in a cartoon, finding your contract when something goes wrong is just as bad. I mean, it's almost a sport, which invariably involves phoning up the supplier to see if they've got a copy as well. It's just terrible. So Martin, you just have to cover your ears, but.
I set up a team of people to do hunt the contract in one of my roles.
There you go.
We had that problem, and it's like, where are the contracts? So, don't know, where are the contracts? Right, you're going to hunt the contract. So.
Exactly. So, and you've just given a really great example of a bit like the black paint pigment, the carbon dioxide, right? I mean, who knew? I live not far from Burton-on-Trent in the UK. Big beer brewing contract brewer for most of the big brands. It stopped, and it stopped not because they couldn't get water, yeast, hops, barley, or anything else, or cans. It stopped because they couldn't get the fizz. They couldn't get carbon dioxide. And the reason was because the producers, mostly mainland Europe, had all decided to do their maintenance of their facilities at the same time. I mean, who would have knew? I mean, when would you ever think of putting a clause into your contract to say, please, can you make sure you coordinate with your competitors not to shut down at the same time so that you can give me continuity of supply? So here's the thing. Because it's that scenario, when we do eventually find our contract, the only reason we went looking for it is because something went wrong. And it's a bit like in a marriage when you put a prenup in place. All right, the prenup is not written for the benefit of the marriage. It's written for when it all goes wrong, this is how we're going to divide up the assets and what we will and won't say in public for the A-listers amongst us. It does nothing. And actually, we don't want that. The proof of the pudding is that kind of contract, or the use of a contract as a prenup, that weapon for beating each other up when everything's failed, is useless. If we haven't already discovered it, what we're going to discover pretty quickly is that we need not contracts, but commercial contracts that help to shape and guide the relationship, whether it's between us and a customer or us and a supplier, that talks about how we're going to make sure we don't end up in a divorce, but that we can both act in a way that's going to make sure that the relationship business relationship is effective. And I think for me, one of those emerging, what are we going to do differently when we come out of it, is not just know where they are, because that would be nice, but also let's make sure they are going to help us in the way that we need to help, which is continuing to allow the flow of business and business relationships between parties. That's what a contract is for. And I'm going to take the guess on it. You'll have seen a bit of this, Martin.
Oh yeah, that's our day-to-day. And important topic you mentioned is there's something happening, and usually the contracts are not, written retrospectively and covered that already. But how can you have learnings from what happened, risks which occurred, on the way you author new contracts? So you consider that. First of all, you need to have the full visibility of the risk. And in order to have full visibility of the risk, you need to also track what happened, how did it impact us, and how did the contract help us on that. So I'm talking a lot about, of course, contract analytics, and we see many customers starting their digital journey based on something which happened in the past. Right now, we see it everywhere. Education, schools. It's amazing what is possible within a couple of weeks, which had never been possible before. And so there's obviously something happening, or happened something which triggered thinking and which triggered change now. Now can we do that in not a panic kind of mode we are in right now, more in a structured way? And the message we actually providing to our customers is always look broad, because many companies are really siloed. You see that every function is digging in their own systems for information. The buy side look into their SIM systems, the sales team look into their CM system, the people in the production actually look into the ERPs, HR looks in HCMs. Everywhere sits a little bit of contract data. And actually in a company, taking Airbus for an example, an airplane is produced based on 80% sourced parts. So actually the contracting part of the buy side needs to be tightly connected with the sell side contracting. Whatever an airline producer or an airplane producer is offering needs to be tightly coupled with the obligations and the risks and the service levels they're getting from their suppliers. And that's basically where we see a system helping a lot. Is if a buyer talks to their suppliers, he should be already aware. And as you said, Richard, early engaged is having physically meetings or virtual meetings right now, but also have the same data set actually. Is what are we tendering for right now? What are the proposals we are sending out? What do I need to take care of on my supply side that I cover that as well? Mitigate risks from the supply chain, increase chances, time to revenue. All these aspects are part of commercial contract management.
I think,
Hayden, do you have any reflections?
Yeah, I think Martin makes some very interesting points. It reminds me of a couple of things. I qualified as a lawyer. So I studied law for a year, and we basically do a degree in 1 year, and then qualified as a barrister. So, obviously to appear in court. Spent many hours looking at construction law contracts and trying to understand, the risk profile within here. And what was interesting, you see, I've thought a lot about what a contract is. And for me, my conclusion, and it's really interesting because you compare it to classic legal thinking, but actually a contract is a risk management device, okay? What it's doing, it's articulating a set of known risks that both parties agree to, okay? A set of known unknown risks that both parties agree to. And this is the Rumsfeld, a set of unknown rules, you see. So, and then what then happens when you negotiate a contract, actually what you're doing is you're negotiating the relative probability, in my view, versus your view of whether any of these risks will crystallize. And then the way we resolve that is that we agree to pay you in the event that that happens, or we'll fudge it so that actually it's ambiguous in terms of the wording, or it's fudged such that actually we know it'll go to court if there's ever a dispute. So a contract is a risk management device. Now that's then very interesting because actually all of these contracts, they're all kind of broadly the same. If you take a particular category, there's probably thousands of different contracts that have been written to underpin that particular category. But actually there will be common, probabilistically, statistically proven events that actually 1 in 10 times this will happen for that category. We know that because the sample size is 10,000. So actually the best clause to manage that is that clause over there. That's the most effective in these jurisdictions under those particular circumstances. So where you get to very quickly is actually we ought to be able to gather up all of these contracts and work out what are the most effective clauses for particular types of risk scenarios, and say actually 9 times out of 10 you need that one, 8 times out of 10 you need that one. And that comes me to blockchain. That takes me to blockchain, because the other thing about a contract, it's just an if-then statement, okay, which is smart contracts. So what we can do is we can create almost like an Amazon marketplace of clauses that relate to particular categories that are most successful in resolving particular situations where risk has crystallized. And that takes you to a place, actually, we start plugging them all together. And then that helps with the automation of the whole contracting process. We can actually put procure to pay embedded on blockchain, so smart contracts. And that's a project for tomorrow, I will say, because that's not something that's happening now. But I mean, I think I would echo the sort of, the broader sentiment that actually this is all kind of wonderful theoretical stuff, and yes, it can all be done, but actually you can't beat building up a relationship with the people that really matter, and that goes for all suppliers, because your sandwich provider could become a strategic supplier for you one day if you're not careful about it.
Yeah. We are getting close to summarizing what it is you've actually said during these 45 minutes. And I also want to urge you, if you want to send in questions. You have really knowledgeable people here that are happy to answer any type of questions. What are the predicaments you've been in? What are the questions you are thinking of in terms of agreements or blockchain or what have you? And we also promise the audience a checklist, something tangible to sort of walk away with, to consider now and ahead in terms of, I guess, increasing that visibility, focusing more on the partnership aspects, creating more reliable relationships with important suppliers, considering that risk exposure, how to consider tools, have I forgotten anything, something of that sort. So are you up for the challenge to actually summarize? And also you do have handouts in the control panel that you can pick up if you want to and have a look later, I would suggest. But do send in questions if you want to. As for the summary, obviously we are and have been in a very particular time, so something related to that and possibly looking ahead. Hayden, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I think we've made very clear the challenge of managing a stressed supply chain. So we've got volatility in terms of supply and demand. We've got administrative challenges from an operational perspective. So things like invoices not getting paid on time, orders not being processed on time, the lack of availability of staff, the impact on the flow of cash up and down the supply chain. So I think it's reasonably clear. And I think we're beginning to emerge from that. I think that there will be a rebalance then in terms of the split between local source and international source. And I think that what we'll see is a repatriation of some of these more critical supply components that we need locally. I'm thinking most obviously about PPE, for example. So I think that, and I think broadly speaking, we have managed the supply chain well. I mean, we see these point issues as it relates to things like polycarbonate, but that's just an outlier event that 6 months ago we couldn't necessarily have said that would appear. We then talked about is blockchain the answer, and I'd say not. We talked about the need for communication, the need for doing the work. Actually, 5 years ago, you should have got to know these people 5 years ago. You should, whether they're tactical, strategic, leverage, exploit suppliers. You should be, the number should be on speed dial, and you should be chatting, swapping text messages with them, setting up WhatsApp channels. What's the temperature like today? How are we doing, guys? So you need to be able to feel that as senior supply managers. You need to be able to feel that, and then Then we've got wonderful tools like Certis. The hygiene, this is about supply chain hygiene and actually having those documents to hand in place. So if there was a checklist, which I think is one of the points you made, Anna, you know, it's what's your contract hygiene. So very simple, list of all the accounts payable, legal entities that you've got set up, do a reconciliation. Where have I got a contract as it relates to every single legal entity in that accounts payable list? It's a very simple piece of hygiene. And I've said before, and you know, Richard flagged this, I call that hunt the contract, and I actually hired a person who sat outside my office for a year, and that was her sole focus, was to tick back legal entity from a supply context. Where's the contract? Where's the contract? And then that then goes to the wonderful tools that Certis can implement for you. And then we can do a couple of things like blockchain, smart contracts, risk management. But then there's also sensing. So let's put these stress test sensors, like our suspension bridge, put them through the supply chain, get them generating data. And we can use clever things like AI to then process those stress points. So we're starting to see adverse delays in payments at this point in the supply chain. We can process those sensors, and we can then begin to profile what the overall stress in our big suspension bridge looks like. So that's my go. Richard, do you want to pick up the baton?
Look, I completely echo your sentiments. I think it's that relationships and dialogue are the key thing now. And as I mentioned, that dialogue is not about this is what you've done wrong, this is what I want you to do about it. It's about what are you worried about, and you know, can I help, and how could we do it differently to make it fix. And while we're doing all of that very effective firefighting, a bit like your hunt the contract activity, we need to be thinking about that. What is it that we're going to do differently when we begin to progress through this? I'm not going to say when it's all over, because I think we just need to get used to the idea that this is progressing. What is it that we need to do differently? As you've already said, insourcing or local sourcing or outsourcing, whether you're going to stick with low-cost countries or whether you're going to need to take the cost on the chin because there's a different risk profile that you're worried about now. So dialogue, share the worry, find solutions, think about your contracts as marriage guidance, not a prenup for a divorce, and then build them to support the way that we're all going to need to work slightly differently going forward. That would be my view. I mean, Martin, what do you think?
Yeah, what I would like to add to the checklist, and of course, completely agreeing to what you said, Richard and Hayden, having a dialogue with your business partners absolutely key. And be sure, as Hayden said, on what comes first now, what we need to make sure, what data do we need. I think on top to that checklist, and we discussed it also with our partners. We discussed it with Microsoft, with Adobe. So partners whose technology we are using to host or to actually make our software more valuable is what can we do right now? And we came up with a program called ACT. And ACT stands for Accelerated Contract Transformation. And we thought about, obviously right now you need to have an understanding, you need visibility of your contracts. So you need to quickly identify right now actually which contracts are impacted by, based on geography, on business divisions, counterparties, and understand really and manage the risk. And as we also discussed in the last 15 minutes, it's very much about having visibility of the risk. And then basically surface critical clauses, which may include force majeure, which is the most obvious, but also understanding terminations, choice of law, informed business planning. So everything which is important in the contract to understand the situation we are in right now and what the customer can do. And then, of course, ascertain that obligations to customers are managed, that we are not having delivery interruptions as we might already have, but how can we make sure that the service is still delivered? And of course, understanding the supplier commitments and the service level agreements to mitigate any supply chain risks. So our offer to you joining the webinars and we're working closely together also with Hayden and PwC on that, is if you want to run analytics on your contracts, AI-based technology is ready, then please be our guest. We can go through your legacy contracts and we can identify those risks together with you, and then we can automate. Nice thing which Richard also pointed out is, if you have an event which obviously impacts contracts going forward, then you should also have an automation around that. How can we have continuous improvement in our contracting based on all the things which happened in the past and things which might happen? So this is a very straightforward offer called ACT, Accelerated Contract Transformation, which we would like to address with you.
Excellent. So for sure, there is a lot more to technology than what we have been using to date. Everybody, it being a black swan or not, let's not go into that conversation. Most were at least taken by surprise. So I also think it's nice for people and companies to learn that there are no silver bullets, and that, you know, more or less everybody are in the same boat, and picking up the phone is still a really good way of lowering that risk exposure and making sure you get the supplies needed, both from your suppliers and to your customers. I think that makes a really good point. The time is getting close to an end. I know, Richard, you of course work with both training, consulting, and also pushing procurement towards a more value-oriented way of working, which is great. Hayden, do you possibly have a book we should read?
Well, you should say that, actually. So,
oh, there it is.
There we go.
Executive Guide to Blockchain.
So that was released in February this year. So I've been in the blockchain space for about 6 years, and then full-time for about 3 years. I think, you know, very quickly, one of the things I identified when I first got into it was that there was a real lack of the kind of text that you can give to business people, intelligent, qualified people, that they could get their heads around it. And myself and co-author, we kind of both agreed that this book was desperately needed. And we set about writing it, and it's got some good reviews. It's on Amazon. I would put this out there for any of the attendees. Anybody that links in with me in the next 24 hours, I'll send them a free copy. So it's Hayden Jones, H-O-Y-D-N Jones. So that includes you, Richard, and Martin.
There we go. Yes, please. Thank you.
That's excellent. That's very good advice. And so finalizing this great session, thank you so much, Richard. Thank you, Hayden, and thank you, Martin, for tuning in and sharing your insights. I think for sure that we have come closer as human beings during this pandemic, and that I treasure, the rest not so much. And on an ending note, I actually wanted to ask you, Martin, on a personal note, how have this situation been? How have you been dealing with the situation now, both, you know, on an individual level and a company level? So leave us with those reflections.
Yeah, that's absolutely a good point. And I think the audience in that webinar, you see us sitting at home. And nobody could imagine that this would have been the case about 4 or 5 months ago. And the situations also, you might see my kids running in the background later on when they finished with homeschooling, another situation nobody faced before. Yeah. And interestingly, so we talked about what did really change for us as a company. Interestingly, we came much closer together. Also, we are still socially distancing. We talk a lot more. I mean, I get into the tunnel of video conferences early morning and nearly can't get out of it, because there's so much interesting things going on. There's so much energy right now where we want to get this thing rolling. And I mean, the downside, to be honest, for me personally right now is it really takes sometimes my wife to pull me away from my desk, because what my company lost, we're incredibly productive, but we are incredibly hardworking, but don't let the family suffer upstairs not seeing you anymore. That's my personal experience right now.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And again, thank you, Hayden. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Martin. And thank you to all of you who tuned in. Make sure to download those handouts and take a look at that video attached as well. I for sure hope to see you again online or in real life. Hope to see you on another occasion, Hayden, Richard and Martin. Until then, maybe, just maybe, you'll too try a bit of herring, meatball and alcohol-free schnapps on Friday.
Okay.
Maybe.
Midsummer.
Midsummer, Swedish midsummer. Thank you so much and bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.